Right, welcome to part 2 of lecture 4 FMGT3224. We're looking at process costing. We're going to talk about the weighted average and the process costing production report, which the first section of which looks kind of like this. So what you're dealing with here is a bit of a reconciliation. It basically says, okay, in terms of physical units, we started out with 300 physical units in the beginning work in process, and we began production on another 6,000, right? So that crew there adds up to 6,300. In the course of the month, we finished, completed, and transferred out of this department 5,400, leaving us with 900 work in process. So these two have to equal each other. Right? If you think about it, it's kind of logical, right? What you started out with plus what you added has to be what you got rid of and end up with. So you may or may not be given all of this information, but you can certainly deduce it if you have enough of the components. Next column we look at, I remember I was talking about two dimensions of costs, one materials, so direct materials, and then the other one conversion, which would be labor and overhead. So under the weighted average method, we don't fuss too much about how complete the work in process inventory is. We kind of make an assumption for our calculation purposes that it's actually 0% complete. Again, we're not going to worry about that now. But when we look at the units completed and transferred out, when they're finished, how, 5,400 physical units, how many equivalent units are we talking about? Well, if they're 100% complete, and they have to be if we're going to transfer them out, and again, this is 100% complete with respect to this mixing department, right? There'll be 0% complete with respect to the next downstream department, but that's okay. So they're going to be 100% complete. So this is the ending work in process here, 900 physical units that are on average 60% complete with respect to materials and 30% complete with respect to conversion. Okay, so that's important. They've had 60% of their materials added, but only 30% of the conversion cost has been added on average. Remember, again, there's a range of products here in our ending finished goods inventory, but on average, 60% with material complete with respect to materials and 30% complete with respect to conversion costs. Okay, so how then do we go about calculating equivalent units from that? Well, hopefully it's fairly obvious. This is now the next section in the production report, kind of the middle section. It's the calculation of equivalent units, and so we look at, well, if we had 900 units, back up here, right? 900 units in ending work in process that are 60% complete, then we have 540 equivalent units with respect to materials, and 900 units, 30% complete, 270 equivalent units with respect to conversion. So we add it all up, and then this is our monthly production. We produced on in the given month in this department, only in this department now, 5,940 units with respect to materials and 5,670 with respect to conversion. So let's practice that now in demo problem brief exercise 5-2, which is located on page 194. Have a go at it. And then you can follow along as I solve it afterwards. Okay, so we've got Clonex Labs Incorporated. We've got some data here, and we are told to compute the equivalent units of production for October, assuming that the company uses the weighted average method of accounting for units and costs. All right, so we're going to do, we're going to create the first part of a process costing production report, and it will look like this. We're going to start with right around here, physical units, and then equivalent units for direct materials and conversion. And so we're going to start out with beginning work in process. So how many units do we have at the beginning of the month? We've got work in process October 1st, 45,000 units. So 45,000 units. And it says we started 175,000 units into production. So started 175. And so that gives us, doing the math here, 220 physical units. And then down here, what we completed and transferred out was 200,000 according to the problem, which means then we have to have left over in our ending work in process 20,000 physical units. Add them up, 220,000 bucks, and just for our own peace of mind, we can say, yep, we balanced there, so we're good so far. Okay. We know that the 200,000 units are going to be 100% complete. So as far as the equivalent units of production there, because they're transferred out, they have to be fully complete. But the ending work in process is not going to be. So what is the percentage of completion that we're told? If we look in here, October 31st, 50% with respect to materials and 20% with respect to conversion. And I should have done that in green, actually. It doesn't, this is not an essential bit, so I'm going to erase. And like magic, there you go. So you don't have to write this down, but I just find it useful to help me remember. Okay, so we're now looking at 50% of the 20,000 here means that we have, on an equivalent unit basis, 10,000 equivalent units with respect to direct materials, and 20% of 20,000 is 4,000 equivalent units with respect to conversion costs. So equivalent units of production, add them up, 210,000 equivalent units with respect to materials, and 204,000, that's a 4, not a 9, 204,000 equivalent units with respect to conversion costs. And so this is basically the first section of a production process costing production report. We do a reconciliation of the physical units to make sure we've got everything captured, and then we look at the ending, the stuff that we did in the month. So what we finished off and transferred out, plus the ending work in process, convert it to equivalent units. So we now have total equivalent units of production for each of our two dimensions here, direct materials and conversion costs, for the month of, whatever this was, October. So that concludes this brief exercise. Okay, so that was demo problem BE 5-2. Now, this may help you if you're kind of more of a visual type person to get a grip on the different components that we're looking at. So if we look at how things work initially on that kind of first piece of the production report, when we're looking at the physical units here, we start the month with beginning work in process, right? And then we're told how many additional units are begun or started in the month. So there's our total number of units that we have to sort of deal with. And then we transfer out a bunch. So assuming that everything works kind of linearly, we're going to transfer out whatever we started in the month, and then any additional units that we started in, whatever we finished in the month, and then plus anything that we started and finished in the month. So this is the amount that we transfer out, and then here is what we're left with, incomplete units, ending work in process. So going back to our example up here, Now a little bit further up. Right? This is that was just a pictorial representation of this stuff here. Okay, so start work in process, beginning work in process plus what we started has got to equal what we transferred out and what we have left over. And that's all this this sort of diagram here was. Okay, so that's with respect to materials. Exactly the same thing with respect to conversion costs, although different percentages because they're not don't necessarily have to follow one another. And so that is the information that's contained in this first section of our process costing production report, section 1. The second section, now that we've calculated the equivalent units, we then do some math to come up with the cost per equivalent unit of our production. So we've got, we'll use an example here, the Double Diamond Ski Company. They have 2 departments, shaping and milling, and oh, I guess that's 1 department. Shaping and milling is a single department. Anyway, and so here's some basic information that we're given in order to prepare our production report. So the first bit is, what do we have to track? This is that physical unit flow, beginning work in process plus what we started. And then we've got what we've transferred out. So based on the math here, you can figure out that there's 400 physical units that need to be left over. And then we take that 400 and we look at the percentages of completion with respect to materials and conversion costs that we were given up here. Not these beginning numbers, but the ending ones here, right? 40% complete with materials and 25% complete with respect to conversion. There's your 40 and your 25, do the math. And now we've figured out that in this month, 4,960 equivalent units with respect to materials and 4,900 equivalent units with respect to conversion costs. Okay, so now the next section. Let's do the cost per equivalent unit. Well, we have, first we're given some information, and that is basically what are the costs that we've spent, costs that we've inherited in our beginning work in process inventory here. Let's see, maybe use a red. So these are costs that have come that we've inherited, and then this is what we're adding, right? So costs that we've inherited in our beginning work in process, and then the cost that we're adding. And so you lay it out like that, and then we have the total cost for the month, 77,000 for direct materials, 71,000 for conversion costs, and the equivalent units. So cost per equivalent unit, you guessed it, 77,000 divided by 4960 and 71 divided by 4900, and that gives us the following. Okay, so we will round these often to more than 2 decimal places, because we're then going to take this and multiply it by many, many units of production. Okay, so some important bits of information to note here: cost per equivalent unit with respect to materials, cost per equivalent unit with respect to conversion, and add the 2 together to get the total cost per equivalent unit, $30.014. All right, let's practice that now in a demo problem, brief exercise 5-5, located on page 195. And actually, I will kick that off in part 3 of the lecture.